The Murderer. Washington, April 27. Justice is satisfied, though blinder vengeance may not be. While the illustrious murdered is on the way to the shrine, the stark corpse of his murderer lies in the shambles. The one died quietly, like his life, the other died fighting, like his crime. And now that over all of them the darkness and the dew have descended, the populace, which may not be all satisfied, may perhaps be calmed. No triumphal mourning can add to the president's glory, no further execration can disturb the assassin's slumbers. They have gone for what they were into history, into tradition, into the hereafter both of men and spirits, and what they were may be in part concluded. Mr. Lincoln's career passes, in extent, gravity, and eventful association, the province of newspaper biography, but Booth is the hero of a single deed, and the delineation of him may begin and be exhausted in a single article. I have been at pains, since the day of the President's obsequies, to collect all valid information on the subject of his assassin, in anticipation of the latter's capture and death. Now that these have been consummated, I shall print this biography. The elder Booth in every land was a sojourner, as all his fathers were. Of Hebrew descent, and by a line of actors, he united in himself that strong Jewish physiognomy which, in its nobler phases, makes all that is dark and beautiful, and the combined vagrancy of all men of genius and all men of the stage. Fitful, powerful, passionate, his life was a succession of vices and triumphs. He mastered the intricate characters of dramatic literature by intuition, rather than by study, and produced them with a vigor and vividness which almost passed the depicting of real life. The stage on which he raved and fought became as historic as the actual decks of battleships, and his small and brawny figure comes down to us in those paroxysms of delirious art, like that of Harold, or Richard, or Prince Rupert. He drank to excess, was profligate but not generous, required but not reliable, and licentious to the bounds of cruelty. He threw off the wife of his bosom to fly from England with a flower girl, and, settling in Baltimore, dwelt with his younger companion, and brought up many children, while his first possessed went down to a drunken and broken-hearted death. He himself, wandering westward, died on the way, errant and feverish, even in the closing moments. His widow, too conscious of her predecessor's wrongs, and often taunted with them, lived apart, frugal and discreet, and brought her 6 children up to honorable maturity. These were Junius Brutus, Edwin Forrest, though he drops the Forrest for professional considerations, John Wilkes, Joseph, and the girls. All of the boys are known to more or less of fame, none of them in his art has reached the renown of the father, but one has sent his name as far as that of the great playwright to whom they were pupils. Wherever Shakespeare is quoted, John Wilkes Booth will be named, and infamously, like that Hubert in King John, who would have murdered the gentle Prince Arthur. It may not be a digression here to ask what has become of the children of the weird genius I have sketched above. Mrs. Booth, against whom calumny has had no word to say, now resides with her daughters in 19th Street, New York. John S. Clark dwells in princely style in Philadelphia, with the daughter whom he married. He is the business partner of Edwin Booth, and they are likely to become as powerful managers as they have been successful stars. Edwin Booth, who is said to have the most perfect physical head in America, and whom the ladies call the beau ideal of the melancholy Dane, dwells also on 19th Street. He has acquired a fortune, and is, without doubt, a frankly loyal gentleman. He could not well be otherwise from his membership in the Century Club, where literature and loyalty are never dissolved. Correct and pleasing without being powerful or brilliant, he has led a plain and appreciated career, and latterly, to his honor, has been awakening among dramatic authors some emulation by offering handsome compensations for original plays. Junius Brutus Booth, the oldest of them all, most resembles in feature his wild and wayward father. He is not as good an actor as was Wilkes, and kept in the West, that border civilization of the drama. He now lies, on a serious charge of complicity, in Capitol Hill Jail. Joseph Booth tried the stage as an utility actor and promptly failed. The best part he ever had to play was Orson in The Iron Chest, and his discomfiture was signal. Then he studied medicine but grew discouraged, and is now in California in an office of some sort. A son of Booth by his first wife became a first-class lawyer in Boston. He never recognized the rest of the family. Wilkes Booth, the third son, was shot dead on Wednesday for attempting to escape from the consequences of murder. Such are the people to whom one of the greatest actors of our time gave his name and lineaments. But I have anticipated the story. Although her family was large, it was not so hard sailing with Mrs. Rosalie Booth as may be inferred. Her husband's gains had been variably great, and they owned a farm of some value near Baltimore. The boys had plain but not sufficient schooling, though by the time John Wilkes grew up Edwin and Junius were making some little money and helping the family. So Wilkes was sent to a better school than they, where he made some eventful acquaintances. One of these won his admiration as much in the playground as in subsequent life upon the field of battle. This was Fitzhugh Lee, son of the great rebel chieftain. I have not heard that Lee ever had any friendship for young Wilkes, but his port and name were enough to excite a less ardent imagination, the son of a soldier already great, and a descendant of Washington. Wilkes Booth has often spoken of the memory of the young man, envied his success, and, perhaps, boasted of more intimacy than he ever had. The exemplars of young Wilkes, it was soon seen, were anything but literary. He hated school and pent-up life, and loved the open air. He used to stroll off to fish, though that sort of amusement was too sedentary for his nature, but went on fowling jaunts with enthusiasm. In these latter he manifested that fine nerve and certain eye, which was the talk of all his associates, but his greatest love was the stable. He learned to ride with his first pair of boots, and hung around the grooms to beg permission to take the nags to water. He grew in later life to be both an indurated and a graceful horseman. Toward his mother and sisters he was affectionate without being obedient. Of all the sons, Wilkes was the most headstrong indoors, and the most contented away from home. He had a fitful gentleness which won him forgiveness, and of one of his sisters he was particularly fond, but none had influence over him. He was seldom contentious, but obstinately bent, and what he willed, to did in silence, seeming to discard sympathy or confidence. As a boy he was never bright, except in a boy's sense, that is, he could run and leap well, fight when challenged, and generally fell in with the sentiment of the crowd. He therefore made many companions, and his early days all passed between Baltimore City and the adjacent farm. I have heard it said as the only evidence of Booth's ferocity in those early times that he was always shooting cats, and killed off almost the entire breed in his neighborhood. But on more than one occasion he ran away from both school and home, and once made the trip of the Chesapeake to the oyster fisheries without advising anybody of his family. While yet very young, Wilkes Booth became an habitué at the theater. His traditions and tastes were all in that direction. His blood was of the stage, like that of the Keans, the Kembles, and the Wallachs. He would not commence at the bottom of the ladder and climb from round to round, nor take part in more than a few thespian efforts. One night, however, a young actor, who was to have a benefit and wished to fill the house, resolved for the better purpose to give Wilkes a chance. He announced that a son of the great Booth of tradition would enact the part of Richmond, and the announcement was enough. Before a crowded place, Booth played so badly that he was hissed. Still holding to his gossamer hopes and high conceit, Wilkes induced John S. Clark, who was then addressing his sister, to obtain him a position in the company of the Arch Street Theater at Philadelphia. For $8 a week, Wilkes Booth, at the age of 22, contracted with William Wheatley to play in any piece or part for which he might be cast, and to appear every day at rehearsal. He had to play the courier in Sheridan Knowles's wife on his first night, with 5 or 10 little speeches to make, but such was his nervousness that he blundered continually, and quite balked the piece. Soon afterward he undertook the part of one of the Venetian comrades in Hugo's Lucretia Borgia, and was to have said in his turn, "Madam, I am Petruchio Pandolfo," instead of which he exclaimed, "Madam, I am Pandolfio Pet, Podolfio Pat, Pantuccio Ped, damn it! What am I?" The audience roared, and Booth, though full of chagrin, was compelled to laugh with them. The very next night he was to play Dawson, an important part in Moore's tragedy of The Gamester. He had bought a new dress to wear on this night, and made abundant preparation to do himself honor. He therefore invited a lady whom he knew to visit the theater, and witness his triumph. But at the instant of his appearance on the stage, the audience, remembering the Petruchio Pandolfo of the previous night, burst into laughter, hisses, and mock applause, so that he was struck dumb, and stood rigid, with nothing whatever to say. Mr. John Dolman, to whose Stukely has played, was compelled, therefore, to strike Dawson entirely out of the piece. These occurrences nettled Booth, who protested that he studied faithfully but that his want of confidence ruined him. Mr. Fredericks, the stage manager, made constant complaints of Booth, who, by the way, did not play under his full name, but as Mr. J. Wilkes, and he bore the general reputation of having no promise, and being a careless fellow. He associated freely with such of the subordinate actors as he liked, but being, through Clark, then a rising favorite, of better connections, might, had he chosen, advanced himself socially, if not artistically. Clark was to have a benefit one evening, and to enact, among other things, a mock Richard III, to which he allowed Wilkes Booth to play a real Richmond. On this occasion, for the first time, Booth showed some energy, and obtained some applause. But, in general, he was stumbling and worthless. I myself remember, on 3 consecutive nights, hearing him trip up and receive suppressed hisses. He lacked enterprise. Other young actors, instead of waiting to be given better parts, committed them to memory, in the hope that their real interpreter might not come to hand. Among these I recall John McCullough, who afterwards became quite a celebrated actor. He was getting, if I correctly remember, only $6 a week, while Booth obtained $8. Yet Wilkes Booth seemed too slow or indifferent to get on the weather side of such chances. He still held the part of third walking gentleman, and the third is always the first to be walked off in case of strait, as was Wilkes Booth. He did not survive 40 weeks' engagement, nor make above $300 in all that time. The Kellers arrived, they cut down the company, and they dispensed with Wilkes Booth. He is remembered in Philadelphia by his failure as in the world by his crime. About this time a manager named Kunkel gave Booth a salary of $20 a week to go to the Richmond Theater. There he played a higher order of parts, and played them better, winning applauses from the easy provincial cities, and taking, as everywhere, the ladies by storm. I have never wondered why many actors were strongly predisposed toward the South. There, their social status is 9 times as big as with us. The hospitable, lounging, buzzing character of the Southerner is entirely consonant with the cosmopolitanism of the stage, and that easy hang-up-your-hatativeness, which is the rule and the demand in thespianship. We place actors outside of society, and execrate them because they are there. The South took them into affable fellowship, and was not ruined by it, but beloved by the fraternity. Booth played 2 seasons in Richmond, and left in some esteem. When the John Brown raid occurred, Booth left the Richmond Theater for the scene of strife in a picked company with which he had affiliated for some time. From his connection with the militia on this occasion he was wont to trace his fealty to Virginia. He was a non-commissioned officer, and remained at Charleston till after the execution, visiting the old pikeman in jail, and his company was selected to form guard around the scaffold when John Brown went, white-haired, to his account. There may be in this a consolation for the canonizers of the first arm-bearer between the sections, that one whose unit swelled the host to crush out that brave old life, took from the scene inspiration enough to slay a merciful president in his unsuspecting leisure. Booth never referred to John Brown's death in bravado. Possibly at that gallows began some such terrible purpose as he afterward consummated. It was close upon the beginning of the war when Booth resolved to transform himself from a stock actor to a star. As many will read this who do not understand such distinctions, let me preface it by explaining that a star is an actor who belongs to no one theater, but travels from each to all, playing a few weeks at a time, and sustained in his chief character by the regular or stock actors. A stock actor is a good actor, and a poor fool. A star is an advertisement in tights, who grows rich and corrupts the public taste. Booth was a star, and being so, had an agent. The agent is a trumpeter who goes on before, writing the impartial notices which you see in the editorial columns of country papers and counting noses at the theater doors. Booth's agent was one Matthew Canning, an exploded Philadelphia lawyer, who took to managing by passing the bar, and J. Wilkes no longer, but our country's rising tragedian. J. Wilkes Booth opened in Montgomery, Alabama, in his father's consecrated part of Richard III. It was very different work between receiving $8 a week and getting half the gross proceeds of every performance. Booth kept northward when his engagement was done, playing in many cities such parts as Romeo, the Corsican Brothers, and Raphael in the Marble Heart. In all of these he gained applause, and his journey eastward, ending in eastern cities like Providence, Portland, and Boston, was a long success, in part deserved. In Boston he received a special commendation for his enactment of Richard. I have looked over this play, his best and favorite one, to see how closely the career of the crookback he so often delineated resembled his own. How like that fearful night of Richard on Bosworth Field must have been Booth's sleep in the barn at Port Royal, tortured by ghosts of victims all repeating, "When I was mortal my anointed body by thee was punched full of deadly holes. Think on the Tower and me, despair and die." Or this, from some of Booth's female victims: "Let me sit heavy on thy soul tomorrow, I that was washed to death with fulsome wine. Poor Clarence, by thy guile betrayed to death. Tomorrow in the battle think on me, despair and die." These terrible conjurations must have recalled how aptly the scene is often rehearsed by Booth, sword in hand, where, leaping from his bed, he cries in horror, "Give me another horse. Bind up my wounds. Have mercy, Jesu. Soft. I did but dream. Oh, coward conscience, how thou dost afflict me." The lights burn blue. It is now dead midnight. Cold, flareful drops stand on my trembling flesh. What do I fear? Myself. There is none else by. Is there a murderer here? No, yes, I am. Then fly, what from myself? Asterisk, 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 asterisk. My conscience hath 1,000 several tongues, and every tongue brings in a several tale, and every tale condemns me for a villain. Perjury, perjury in the highest degree. Murder, stern murder in the direst degree. All several sins, all used in each degree. Throng to the bar, crying all, guilty, guilty. By these starring engagments, Booth made incredible sums. His cashbook, for one single season, showed earnings deposited in bank of $22,000. In New York he did not get a hearing, except at a benefit or two, where he played parts not of his selection. In Philadelphia his earlier failure predisposed the people to discard him, and they did. But he had made enough, and resolved to invest his winnings. The oil fever had just begun. He hired an agent, sent him to the western districts and gave him discretionary power. His investments all turned out profitable. Booth died, as far as understood, without debts. The day before the murder he paid an old friend $100 which he had borrowed 2 days previously. He banked at J. Cook's in Washington, generally, but turned most of his funds into stock and other matters. He gave $80 8 months ago for a part investing with others in a piece of western oil land. The certificate for this land he gave to his sister. Just before he died his agent informed him that the share was worth $15,000. Booth kept his accounts latterly with great regularity, and was lavish as ever, but took note of all expenditures, however irregular. He was one of those men whom the possession of money seems to have energized. His life, so purposeless long before, grew by good fortune to a strict computation with the world. Yet what availed so sudden reformation, and of what use was the gaining of wealth, to throw one's life so soon away, and leap from competence to hunted infamy? The beauty of this man and his easy confidentiality, not familiar, but marked by a mild and even dignity, made many women impassioned of him. He was licentious as men, and particularly as actors go, but not a seducer, so far as I can learn. I have traced one case in Philadelphia where a young girl who had seen him on the stage became enamored of him. She sent him bouquets, notes, photographs, and all the accessories of an intrigue. Booth, to whom such things were common, yielded to the girl's importunities at last and gave her an interview. He was surprised to find that so bold a correspondent was so young, so fresh, and so beautiful. He told her therefore, in pity, the consequences of pursuing him, that he entertained no affection for her, though a sufficient desire, and that he was a man of the world to whom all women grew fulsome in their turn. "Go home," he said, "and beware of actors. They are to be seen, not to be known." The girl, yet more infatuated, persisted. Booth, who had no real virtue except by scintillations, became what he had promised, and one more soul went to the Isles of Cyprus. In Montgomery, if I do not mistake, Booth met the woman from whom he received a stab which he carried all the rest of his days. She was an actress, and he visited her. They assumed a relation creditable only in La Bohème, and were as tender as love without esteem can ever be. But, after a time, Booth wearied of her and offered to say goodbye. She refused, he treated her coldly; she pleaded, he passed her by. Then, with a jealous woman's frenzy, she drew a knife upon him and stabbed him in the neck, with the intent to kill him. Being muscular, he quickly disarmed her, though he afterwards suffered from the wound poignantly. Does it not bring a blush to our faces that a good, great man, like he who has died, our president, should have met his fate from one so inured to a life of ribaldry? Yet, only such an one could have been found to murder Abraham Lincoln. The women persecuted Booth more than he followed them. He was waylaid by married women in every provincial town or city where he played. His face was so youthful, yet so manly, and his movements so graceful and excellent, that other than the coarse and errant placed themselves in his way. After his celebrated Boston engagement, women of all ages and degrees pressed in crowds before the Tremont House to see him depart. Their motives were various, but whether curiosity or worse, exhibiting plainly the deep influence which Booth had upon the sex. He could be anywhere easy and gentlemanly, and it is a matter of wonder that with the entry which he had to many well-stocked homes, he did not make hospitality mourn and friendship find in his visit shame and ruin. I have not space to go into the millionth catalogue of Booth's intrigues, even if this journal permitted further elucidation of so bland a subject. Most of his adherents of this class were, like Heine's Polish virgins, and he was very popular with those dramatic ladies, few, I hope and know, in their profession, to whom divorce courts are superfluous. His last permanent acquaintance was one Ella Turner, of Richmond, who loved him with all the impetuosity of that love which does not think, and strove to die at the tidings of his crime and fight. Happy that even such a woman did not die associated with John Wilkes Booth. Such devotion to any other murderer would have earned some poet's tear. But the daisies will not grow a whole rod from his grave. Of what avail, may we ask, on the impossible supposition that Booth's crime could have been considered heroic, was it that such a record should have dared to die for fame? Victory would have been ashamed of its champion, as England of Nelson, and France of Mirabeau. I may add to this record that he had not been in Philadelphia a year, on first setting out in life, before getting into a transaction of the kind specified. For an affair at his boarding-house he was compelled to pay a considerable sum of money, and it happily occurred just as he was to quit the city. He had many quarrels and narrow escapes through his license. A husband in Syracuse, NY, once followed him all the way to Cleveland to avenge a domestic insult. Booth's paper, to whom it may concern, was not his only attempt at influential composition. He sometimes persuaded himself that he had literary ability, but his orthography and pronunciation were worse than his syntax. The paper deposited with J.S. Clark was useful as showing his power to entertain a deliberate purpose. It has one or two smart passages in it, as this: "Our once bright red stripes look like bloody gashes on the face of heaven." In the passages following there is common sense and lunacy. I know how foolish I shall be deemed for undertaking such a step as this, where, on the one side, I have many friends and everything to make me happy, where my profession alone has gained me an income of more than $20,000 a year, and where my great personal ambition in my profession has such a great field for labor. On the other hand, the South have never bestowed upon me one kind word, a place now where I have no friends, except beneath the sod, a place where I must either become a private soldier or a beggar. To give up all of the former for the latter, besides my mother and sisters, whom I love so dearly, although they so widely differ with me in opinion, seems insane, but God is my judge.